They called her crazy, just a female mechanic with a shovel, digging holes in her backyard like she'd lost her mind. Neighbors laughed. Strangers filmed. Maybe she's building a bunker for the apocalypse. One joked. Or burying her broken dreams. Another sneered. But what Samantha Rhodes was really digging for wasn't junk, wasn't treasure. It was a secret buried for decades, hidden beneath rusted metal and her father's final words. And when the world finally saw what she uncovered, it didn't just shock a small town. It shook the nation. But before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. You probably wouldn't think much of Samantha Rhodes if you passed her on the street. Grease-stained jeans, sun-faded work shirt, hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked more like a woman on her way to fix a tractor than someone about to change the course of a town's history. She lived alone in a small, rust-colored cottage at the edge of Willow Creek, with a sagging porch and an old Chevy truck that hadn't moved in years. Folks around here knew her as that female mechanic who used to fix up farm equipment until the shop shut down. Kind of quiet, a bit rough around the edges, but harmless. So when neighbors saw Samantha out in her backyard one morning, shoveling into the earth like she'd lost her mind, the gossip started fast. Is she burying something back there? Probably another busted engine. She's finally cracked. But Samantha didn't care. Day after day, hour after hour, she kept digging. No explanations, no signs, just her, the shovel, and something deep in the ground calling her name. They laughed behind their fences. But what Samantha Rhodes was about to uncover would silence the entire nation. The day Samantha Rhodes began digging wasn't just any day. It was the one-year anniversary of her father's death. Clifford Rhodes, a Vietnam veteran, a diesel mechanic, a man of few words and calloused hands. He wasn't one for drama or sentiment, but just hours before he passed, barely conscious in his hospital bed, he gripped Samantha's wrist, looked her in the eye one last time, and whispered, "If the world ever gets too loud, dig beneath the old oak." They never found it. She thought it was just the morphine talking, a fading mind clinging to old memories. She even laughed a little, wiping away her tears. But a year later, she stood at the edge of her backyard, staring at the bare patch where the old oak tree used to grow, the one they had to cut down when its roots lifted the foundation. His words wouldn't stop echoing, and Samantha had nothing left to lose. She grabbed her shovel, tied up her hair, and started digging. At first, it was just a quiet act of grief. Therapy, maybe. Something to feel close to him, something to do besides fall apart. But as the hours passed and her arms began to ache, she didn't stop. She couldn't. It was like her father's voice was buried in the soil, urging her on. Neighbors began to notice. At first, they assumed she was gardening. Then, maybe installing a tank. But by the third day, when the hole was deep enough to hide a full-grown man, the whispers began. She's losing it. What's she even looking for? Poor thing never got over Cliff's death. They watched from windows and porches, making jokes they'd never say to her face. Someone even left a flyer for a grief counselor in her mailbox. But Samantha ignored them all. Every clang of the shovel, every handful of dirt, it was a conversation with the man who raised her. She remembered his quiet guidance in the garage, the long nights under the hood of an engine, the way he always said, "Some things, Sam, are meant to stay buried. Others, you better pray you find them before someone else does." On the 9th day, just before dusk, her shovel struck something. It wasn't rock. It wasn't root. It echoed hollow and deep, like metal. She dropped to her knees, frantically brushing dirt away with her hands. What emerged was a rusted steel hatch, rectangular, with faded military markings barely visible under the grime. A locking mechanism, industrial, sealed. Samantha froze. She knew her father had served in classified units during the war, but he never talked much about it. Now, all the silence, the nightmares, the scars on his back, they suddenly meant something more. She sat back on her heels, breath heavy, heart pounding. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was real. She took out her phone, snapped a picture, and for a long moment just stared at it. Then, without saying a word, she posted the image in a small veterans forum he used to browse. No caption, no name, just the hatch. It took less than 3 hours. By midnight, her inbox was flooded. Former military, conspiracy theorists, engineers, even a journalist from Deepon. And by morning, there were black SUVs parked outside her fence. The town of Willow Creek had always been quiet. But what Samantha Rhodes just uncovered was about to make it the loudest place in the country. By dawn, the whispers had turned into footsteps. At first, it was just curious neighbors clutching their coffee mugs, pretending to walk their dogs as they passed by Samantha's yard for the 3rd or 4th time that morning. But by 9, the black SUVs had returned, this time with tinted windows, quiet engines, and men in suits who didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. Samantha knew exactly who they were, or at least what they represented. 3 of them stepped out. No badges, no names, just firm handshakes, dark sunglasses, and voices that sounded like they'd practiced being calm for a living. "We're here about the hatch," one of them said. Samantha didn't flinch. I figured. They didn't ask for permission to see it. They simply expected her to lead them there, and for some reason, she did. Something about the way they carried themselves made her feel like she'd been caught in a game she never agreed to play. They examined the rusted hatch without speaking for nearly 10 minutes. One of them took out a small device, scanned its surface, and nodded slowly. Another crouched down, gently tapped at a corner, and whispered something under his breath. Finally, the man in charge turned to her. "Do you have any idea what this is?" Samantha looked him square in the eye. "No, but I know my father did." That made them pause. "You're Cliff Rhodes's daughter," one asked. She nodded. They exchanged glances, subtle, but unmistakable. The energy shifted. "Your father was part of a high-clearance engineering detail back in the late 70s. Worked on a project in Montana that was later decommissioned. Most of the files were sealed." He hesitated. "Some of us weren't even briefed." Samantha crossed her arms. Why was he told to bury it? The man's jaw tightened. Because it wasn't supposed to exist. The words hung heavy in the humid morning air. They offered to take over the site for her safety. They said, to prevent public panic, to preserve national security. But Samantha refused. It was on her land, her father's land. Whatever was down there, he wanted her to find it. Not them. So they gave her a warning instead. "You didn't see anything. Nothing here belongs to you." Then they left, but not before one of them dropped a business card on her porch. "No name, just a phone number. Call if anything opens," he said. For the next 48 hours, Samantha barely slept. The hatch haunted her. It hummed faintly when touched. It was sealed tight, but not locked, as if it was waiting for someone who knew how to speak its language. She tried a crowbar. Useless. A blowtorch. The metal wouldn't bend. But then, in the bottom drawer of her father's old toolbox, she found a small, palm-sized disc engraved with the same symbol etched faintly onto the hatch. A triangle within a circle. She had never seen it before. When she placed it gently against the center of the hatch, something clicked. A low rumble. The ground trembled beneath her knees. And then, it opened. Slowly, mechanically. Dust and decades of silence spilled into the air. A ladder descended into darkness. She could smell rust, oil, and something older, something untouched for years, a breath of the past. With her flashlight trembling in her hand, Samantha looked down the shaft. It went deeper than she imagined. She had no idea what was waiting below. But she knew one thing. This was no bomb shelter. This was no storage bunker. This was a secret built to stay buried. And for the first time in her life, Samantha Rhodes wasn't fixing something broken. She was about to uncover something the world was never meant to see. The metal ladder groaned under Samantha's weight as she descended, step by step, into the cold silence below her backyard. Her flashlight beam cut through the thick dust, revealing curved steel walls, old pipes, and panels filled with dials and switches. Everything was coated in rust and time. The air was damp, metallic, and carried a stillness that didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like something had been waiting. The chamber at the bottom was larger than she expected, almost like a small underground lab. But it wasn't military gray. The walls had been hand-painted at some point, faded white with red stenciled lettering. She read it slowly. Project Vessel, Civilian Integration Prototype. What the hell was this? She stepped carefully toward a long table, still bolted to the ground. Scattered across it were faded blueprints, sealed files, and dozens of cassette tapes labeled with initials C.R., her father's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she picked up one tape. She hadn't heard his voice in over a year. Sliding it into a nearby recorder, she pressed play, expecting static. But instead, her father's voice emerged, calm and familiar. If you're listening, Sam, then you found it. God, I hope you're the one who finds it. She froze. Tears welled in her eyes instantly. They told us to destroy everything, said the project failed, said it was too dangerous. But I couldn't, because this isn't a weapon, it's hope, real hope. They just didn't like who it was meant to save. He paused. You could hear him breathe. Vessel was designed to help people like your mother, civilians with neurological diseases, memory loss, trauma. We were building a way to store and reconstruct memory through energy mapping. It worked. Too well. And when the suits saw what it could really do, they shut us down. Her knees buckled. She sat on the floor, head in her hands. I buried it under our land because they would never think to look here, because they thought I was just a mechanic like you. They underestimated us. Kid, that was her father. Always quiet, always overlooked. But he had been working on something far beyond machines. Something human. Something world-changing. And now, it was in her hands. The next few hours passed in a blur. Samantha combed through files, pulled tarps off strange equipment, wiped dust from monitors. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. This place held the blueprint of memories, a way to store, protect, and even relive them, like a time capsule of the soul. But more than the science, it was the intent that hit her. Her father hadn't buried a machine. He had buried a second chance for people whose memories were fading, for families trying to hold on, for children like her who had watched a parent slowly disappear before their eyes. The woman who once fixed tractors with borrowed tools was now holding something that could reshape the future of medicine, of memory, of human connection. And for the first time since the day he died, Samantha no longer felt lost. That night, as she sat by the edge of the hatch, feet dangling into the darkness, the same neighbors who once mocked her began to gather at their fences watching, but now in silence. The word had spread. She didn't care about the men in suits or the reporters calling her phone. She only cared about finishing what her father started. And suddenly, she no longer looked like a woman digging in madness. She looked like a guardian of something forgotten. A mechanic of the mind, a daughter who refused to let memory die. Because Samantha Rhodes hadn't just uncovered a secret. She had uncovered purpose. She only cared about finishing what her father started. And suddenly, she no longer looked like a woman digging in madness. She looked like a guardian of something forgotten. A mechanic of the mind, a daughter who refused to let memory die. Because Samantha Rhodes hadn't just uncovered a secret. She had uncovered purpose. In the days that followed, Samantha Rhodes's quiet backyard became the center of a storm she never saw coming. It started with a reporter from a small science blog who somehow got hold of the tape her father left the one about Project Vessel. He published an article calling her discovery the most important buried technology of the century. Within 48 hours, every major news outlet was calling. CNN, BBC, even a science team from MIT reached out, offering to fly out immediately at their own expense. But Samantha wasn't looking for fame. She was still sleeping in the same creaky bed, sipping instant coffee and checking oil levels on her busted Chevy every morning. Her life didn't feel like it had changed. Not yet. Until the letters started coming. Handwritten ones, from people she didn't know. A man in Arizona, whose wife no longer recognized their children. A young woman in Ohio, whose father had early-onset dementia at 43. A little boy's drawing of his grandpa with the words, "Help him remember me." They weren't asking for interviews. They weren't offering money. They were asking for hope. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't just a project her father left behind. This wasn't just some relic of Cold War tech. This was a chance to finish the work he never could. A way to make his death and his silence mean something. But she couldn't do it alone. So Samantha did the last thing anyone expected from a small-town mechanic with no college degree and a dirt-streaked flannel shirt. She held a press conference standing right in front of the hatch, with the old American flag from her father's funeral folded in her hand. "My dad wasn't a scientist. He was a mechanic, but he believed that memory is worth fighting for," she said. Voice trembling. "He built this place to help people remember. Not just data, not just facts, but who they were, who they loved. I don't have the answers, but I have the keys, and I'm asking the world help me unlock what he left behind." The video went viral. Scientists, engineers, neurologists, veterans, even tech companies, the same ones who might have laughed at her last month, now offered support. Quiet donations came in. Old colleagues of her father reached out under pseudonyms. One even sent a schematic she'd never seen before, a potential upgrade to the memory interface system. But through all the chaos, Samantha stayed grounded. She didn't sell the rights. She didn't hand it over. She started a foundation, the Rhodes Initiative, dedicated to advancing civilian memory preservation and accessibility. Her small-town garage became a makeshift lab. She hired locals who had never touched a computer, taught them to clean components, catalog files, and document every new discovery. The town that once gossiped about her now protected her, and the secret buried beneath their soil. She partnered with a university, offering open access to non-classified documents. And in a gesture that moved thousands, she released the first digitized memory sample her father ever recorded, a 30-second loop of her mother laughing at the dinner table in 1983. Millions watched it. Some cried, some questioned, but no one doubted the power of what she had found. For the first time in decades, people began to imagine a future where memories didn't have to fade, where love didn't have to be lost to time, where goodbye wasn't always forever. And in the middle of it all stood Samantha Rhodes, a woman who once turned wrenches in silence, A woman who used to be laughed at for the dirt under her nails. Now she was building something far bigger than machines. She was building a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. The attention, the cameras, the praise, they were never what Samantha Rhodes wanted. At her core, she was still the same woman who preferred engine grease to microphones and silence to applause. But the world had other plans for her. She was now the reluctant face of memory, of second chances, of grief transformed into something useful. And with that came pressure. The Rhodes Initiative had grown beyond anything she ever imagined. There were now research teams working out of Willow Creek's abandoned high school, a waiting list of families hoping to preserve the fading minds of loved ones, funding requests, legal threats, news vans, and buried beneath all of it was exhaustion. There were days Samantha didn't get out of bed, nights when the weight of expectation made her feel like she was suffocating. She would lie awake, clutching her father's old flannel shirt, whispering to the ceiling, "I don't know what I'm doing. Dad." And then came the letter. It arrived with no return address, just her name, handwritten in shaky cursive. Inside was a photograph, old and yellowed, from the 1960s. Two young boys in military fatigues, smiling, on the back. It read, Cliff Rhodes and Thomas Whitaker, 1968. Attached was a note. "He never stopped talking about you. When he told me about the vessel project, he said he hoped one day you'd finish what he couldn't. I've got something you need to see. Come alone." To Whitaker. It was a name she hadn't heard in decades, her father's best friend. Long presumed dead. The address was 3 states away, deep in the Appalachian hills. She left the next morning without telling anyone. Thomas Whitaker lived in a small cabin with no internet, no phone, no clock on the wall. But his mind, his memory, was crystal clear. He remembered her as a toddler, the way her curls bounced when she ran. The oil-stained overalls she wore by age 6. And then he said something that stopped her cold. "Your father didn't just save the tech, he saved a person." He opened a locked drawer, pulled out a small, rectangular device, sleek, matte, unlike anything she'd seen before. A vessel prototype, different from what she had found underground. And inside it, her mother's memories. He explained how Cliff had secretly run a personal preservation trial, not on a test subject, but on the woman he loved, who was slipping away from early onset Alzheimer's. Before she forgot everything, Cliff had mapped her laughter, her stories, the way she said Samantha's name when she kissed her goodnight. Samantha was speechless. For a long moment, she just held the device in her hand like it was made of glass, and her whole childhood was inside it. Whitaker placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's yours. He wanted you to hear her again. Not as an experiment, but as a daughter." She drove home in silence. No music, no calls. Just her and that little black box. That night, in the quiet of her father's garage, surrounded by the smell of old oil and memories. Samantha plugged it in. The screen blinked once. Then her mother's voice, soft, sweet, untouched by time, filled the room. "Sammy, if you're hearing this, it means your dad did it. It means you're still fighting, and that makes me so proud of you, baby. So proud." Samantha broke down. For the first time since all of this began, she allowed herself to grieve, to let go. Not because she was weak, but because she had carried the world too long without crying. And in that moment, the girl who once fixed engines in silence realized something powerful. She wasn't just preserving memory anymore. She was healing the past, her own, her father's, maybe the world's. Months passed. The news cycle moved on. Headlines faded, and the buzz around Project Vessel began to quiet, but Samantha Rhodes kept going. She wasn't interested in glory, never was. Instead, she stayed in Willow Creek, quietly rebuilding the old high school gym into something new, a living archive, a place where stories could be stored, memories could be protected, and voices long silenced could speak again. There were no velvet ropes or golden plaques, no high-tech glass tunnels or entry fees, just a small wooden sign out front. The Rhodes Memory Library, where nothing is forgotten. And inside, beneath warm lights and shelves of humming servers, were thousands of preserved memory files, not from famous politicians or wealthy donors, but from ordinary people. A grandfather's bedtime stories, a mother's lullaby, a daughter's first I love you to the mom who wouldn't live to remember it. Laughter, tears, goodbyes, hugs, hope. Samantha sat at the front desk every afternoon, greeting visitors with a quiet smile and a cup of coffee. People came from everywhere, rural towns, distant cities, even countries she'd never been to. Some came to preserve. Others came just to feel close to someone they had lost. One afternoon, a boy no older than 10 walked in, clutching a small recorder. He asked if this was the place where you can save someone before they're gone. Samantha knelt down to meet his eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "That's exactly what this place is." He handed her the recorder. "My mom forgets my name sometimes now, but she used to sing to me. I recorded her when she didn't know." Samantha took the recorder with both hands. Gently. "We'll keep it safe," she whispered. Outside, the town that once mocked her had transformed. The people who used to peek over her fence now helped run the facility. Volunteers, students, veterans, even the mayor's son was learning to code memory encryption. What began as a single act of grief, a daughter digging a hole in her backyard, had grown into a movement. And yet, Samantha never once called herself a hero. She still wore her father's flannel, still fixed the occasional tractor when it broke down, still sat on the back porch some nights, staring at the stars, wondering if he'd be proud. But something had shifted. She no longer felt like the outsider in her own life. She no longer walked with the weight of doubt on her back. Because now, she carried stories, real ones, of people who were given a second chance at being remembered. And one evening, just as the sun dipped low and bathed the fields in gold, Samantha stood beside the hatch in her backyard, the same one that started it all, and placed a small plaque next to it. It read, "Clifford Rhodes, mechanic, father, dreamer. He didn't build a machine. He built a way to never say goodbye." She stood there for a long time. No cameras, no crowds, just her and the wind. And the memory of a man who once whispered, "If the world ever gets too loud, dig." And she had, and what she found didn't just change a town, or a field, or a memory. It changed everything. Because Samantha Rhodes, the mechanic once mocked, dismissed, and laughed at, had become the keeper of something sacred. A place where no voice was ever truly lost. A home for memories, and for the people who refused to let them disappear. Anyone can protect a memory if they're brave enough to dig for it, and believe it's worth saving. As the sun set over the fields of Willow Creek, Samantha Rhodes stood beside the hatch in her backyard, not to bury anything, but to open a future her father only dreamed of. A future where no story had to be forgotten, where laughter, love, and final goodbyes could live on, exactly as they were. The dream that once belonged to a grieving daughter now belongs to every family who's ever watched someone they love fade away, to every child trying to remember the sound of their mother's voice, to every person who believes that even in silence, memory deserves a second chance. The woman once called crazy had become the keeper of the most human thing of all remembrance. Because for Samantha and for those who follow, memory was never meant to disappear. It was meant to endure. The end. Up next, 2 more unforgettable stories are waiting for you. Click to keep remembering with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe memories are worth fighting for.